Looking to take your financial knowledge to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to Ask Ralph, offering accounting, technical, and financial advice. Whether you're looking to save taxes or improve your business, he's got you covered. Here's your host of Ask Ralph, Ralph Eastup Jr.
Welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show. Today I thought I'd talk about a really interesting topic, and that's something I do get asked a lot of questions about, and that is what to do if your accountant botched your tax return. Now, there's an article by Tina Oram, which was published on April 6, 2018 on the MarketWatch site that talks about, what you should do if your accountant botched your tax return. Now, being a professional accountant and somebody that does a lot of tax work, I thought this was an excellent article, and it's a good way to really, clear the air if something like this happens. And the first thing she mentions here, and I agree with this 100%, is make sure it's the preparer's fault. And I'm going to tell you a little bit from personal experience. A lot of times we'll get a call into the office and they'll say, hey, I need to talk to Ralph because, he messed up my tax return. And I've trained my staff, to say, let's think about this. And I always tell them, look, I need to see the notice, because before you can go making an assumption that somebody made a mistake, or as this lady called it, botched it, you need to make sure that you know what the issue is. And one of the things it mentions here is, be sure you provided all the documentation and information that the tax preparer needed to prepare the return correctly. As they quote here, the accountant obviously can't know if something exists if the individual didn't tell them about it. One of the ways that we as accountants try to, to mitigate that is we provide, maybe a disclosure letter, an engagement letter. We may prepare an organizer that kind of, asks you to, check all the boxes and make sure you haven't forgotten anything. But this is really a good place to start, and it does to make sure it's the preparer's fault. And before any reputable preparer is going to be able to tell you whether it's their fault or not, they're going to need to see the notice. So it's fantastic that you want to call, but really the best thing to do is to get in contact with the preparer's office or the accountant's office and find out what's the best way to get the document to that preparer. The next thing you want to do, and this is something that mentions here, is check your contract. Now, what they're talking about here is that most reputable tax preparers will have you sign an engagement letter that outlines what goes on if there's an error. And, we use one of these. And basically what our engagement letter says is that, in the end, it's your tax return. It's your responsibility to make sure that you look it over and make sure that all of the income items were, put on there correctly. In some cases, we'll make a mistake, and that's something that we've got to own. But in a lot of cases, it's just simply that the individual, the client, didn't give us the information or didn't give us all the information. Now, what you need to know in general, you're on the hook. This is the customer for any tax that you discover you owe. But a decent preparer usually will pick up the tab for penalties and sometimes interest. That's something we can talk about. You incur because of the preparer's error. It's also reasonable to ask the preparer to put together an amended return at no charge if the error is the preparer's fault. One of the things I tell clients a lot of times is that, listen, we do our best to not make mistakes, but we are not perfect. If you find out once we filed your tax return that a mistake has been made of something we caused, we absolutely would not charge you for that. We will prepare the amended return. We would write a letter or, address a letter it's been written to the taxpayer to talk about, okay, what do we need to do to get that fixed? That's just something we absolutely do. One of the big problems that we run into, though, is sometimes you're just the unlucky winner of the audit lottery. And that's something that is really difficult for both parties. It's tough for us as the accountant, and it's tough for the individual who's receiving that letter. A lot of people will make the assumption that, well, Ralph, you prepared the tax return, so there's something wrong with it. Well, it could be something as simple as, and we get these a lot, the state of Delaware might send you a letter and say, hey, we noticed on your itemized deduction Schedule A that you took a mortgage interest deduction of, $18,000. We just want you to send us proof of that. Because when we file a return electronically, we don't send the source documents with that. So it's very possible that, something like that would need to be addressed. Now, if it's something really simple like that, I would think most preparers would just handle that for you. Now, the next thing to do is to contact the preparer. We talked a little bit about this when you making sure it's the preparer's fault, but alert the preparer in writing and provide all the correspondence you've been getting from the IRS or state tax authority. Most tax preparers and accountants will look at these things absolutely free. They're not going to charge you anything. And you may want to set an appointment to talk face to face, depending upon the situation, and determine what's incorrect. Then discuss the steps to fix it. And document those steps. I don't know how many times I've worked with a new client that has come over from someone else, and they'll make a comment like, "Hey, Ralph, I tried to get my preparer to fix this," or he just made up numbers, or she made up numbers. And I said, "Okay, well, what did you do to document that?" "Well, I just kind of left the return there and he did it." Well, wrong answer. You own this tax return. I've talked about this many times on many of my other broadcaster shows, and it's very important that you take ownership of that return, and you need to understand. And I don't expect any of my clients to have the same level of knowledge that I do, but they need to have a basic understanding. If they're looking at their itemized deduction schedule, and let's say I keyed something in wrong, and it was supposed to be $1,000 donated to the Goodwill, and I hit an extra zero, and now it's $10,000 that was donated. Well, clearly, when you're looking over your tax return, that should come to your attention. Say, wait a second, Ralph, that doesn't make any sense. Now, it could be something, something was missed, or it could be something that was double counted. Now, in those cases, you might not see it. But, contact a preparer and make sure that you've got a meeting of the mind so you can understand how best to do it. The next thing they notice on here is number 4, notify the IRS and professional organizations. I would say 9 times out of 10, when I get a story about someone, I'm not going to that lady or I'm not going to that guy anymore, I ask them, did you notify the IRS? Did you notify, professional organizations? Did you notify the American Institute of CPAs? Did you notify the National Association of Enrolled Agents or the National Association of Tax Preparers? Or did you file a complaint with the IRS? The only way you're going to get rid of these people who shouldn't be preparing tax returns if someone brings it to their attention. If you've had horrible, work with a preparer, I'm not talking about, bad customer service, but I'm talking about, the things aren't being done right. They're asking you to do things that are inappropriate. First of all, don't let them file your return, but you need to make sure that you report this somewhere. You didn't go into the IRS website and file a complaint. It's very important that if you find somebody that doesn't know what they're doing or is doing things inappropriate, that you report that, because you want somebody else to have the benefit of knowing, well, this person, isn't somebody you want to go. You can report them, do a Google review, for example. You can do a Better Business Bureau review, maybe a Facebook review, or do something to alert people to, hey, but if you're going to do that, make sure that you've really reviewed the information and make sure that this person is definitely responsible for this error. And then the final thing they talk about here is tell it to the judge if you must. And this is really a last resort. And you have to think about this in terms of, how much are you willing to spend to go and spend your day in court? How much are you going to lose in, lost wages, or, how much are you going to lose in the time that you have to put this together? And I really feel like if you've made the right selection about who to handle your tax preparer, you should never really get to this. If you've got a great contract with your preparer, if you've got a great engagement letter that outlines, the responsibilities, and like I said before, you've got to take ownership of this. This is your return. You should know, okay, does that income make sense? Did I make $50,000 in my job? Oh yeah, that makes sense. Did I give, $3,000 in charitable contributions? Is my mortgage interest, $15,000? Are my property taxes $4,000? Those are all things that you need to know so that you can look at your return and make sense of it. So I really hope this was helpful of how to deal with a situation when your accountant has botched your tax return.
You've been listening to Ask Ralph, brought to you by Saggio Accounting Plus. Please subscribe to and rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating and review. Our podcast is produced by Carolyn Peters. Thank you for listening, and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Ask Ralph Media. You can also hear me each week on 1450 WILM and on 1410 WDOV in Delaware, and on the iHeartRadio app. Submit your questions or ideas for future shows by sending an email to AskRalph@AskRalph.com.
The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.